And welcome back, everybody, to the Podcaster Nation. That's right. I said welcome back because I know you were just listening to our stuff. You loved it so much you came back for more. Folks, I don't blame you. That was a brilliant move because we have a lot more for you. Now, why do we have so much for you? Because this is the podcast that's about podcasters, it's for podcasters, and it's done by podcasters. Folks, this is the place where the rising tide raises all ships. This is the place where we come together to raise each other up. Let's get sailing with our guest today. He is a board certified neurosurgeon. He is an assistant professor at University of North Carolina. He is also the host of the Dr. Kumar Discovery podcast. Please welcome Dr. Ravi Kumar. Doc, how you doing today?
Good. Thanks for having me, Rory.
I appreciate you coming on. You've got some very interesting topics that you talk about, and it's a great podcast. You have a great voice for it. Got to tell you that right off the bat.
Thank you.
Uh, as we, get into this, I'm sure there's plenty for us to talk about in terms of your subject matter. Before we do that, though, tell everybody, who is Dr. Ravi Kumar? What are you about? What path kind of led you here?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me again. Yeah, I'm a board certified neurosurgeon, but 20 years ago I was not. I was someone who was trying to figure out how to make myself better, and I think part of that led me to medical school. I mean, just curiosity and like what makes us tick, what makes us better. And so I ended up in medical school, and from there I ended up in neurosurgery, which was a pretty long road. And it was actually a very fun long road. And towards the end of it, right as I was coming into practice, I got really sick, and I didn't know why. Honestly, I went in, there were some inciting factors, I think, but really my ability to like be healthy and happy just completely fell apart. And that started me on this like kind of journey of trying to figure out what makes us healthy, what makes life, our biology optimized. And when, in the process of trying to figure those things out, I realized, hey, man, a lot of this stuff I learned in medical school and throughout residency was just not accurate. These things are have some hidden benefit, some ulterior incentive behind them that drives a message that is not necessarily the truth or the probabilistic truth. And so I just became very curious, and it really took me on a path parallel to my career as a neurosurgeon, because I'm still a practicing neurosurgeon. But it took me on this path of just asking questions about everything, you know? And when you ask questions, you find answers, and the answers are sometimes surprise you. So, I got to the point where I was like, you know what? I'm going to start sharing this with everybody else. And that's why I started my podcast.
Nice, nice. I mean, you went through it. I mean, this journey. I read someplace, or I heard it. I think you sold everything, moved to India, did the whole
Yeah.
deal. That was to get back in touch with something, or to
Yeah.
kind of break free for a little while, give you the time. What kind
You
of
know,
led to
all
that?
Yeah, all those things. I
Yeah.
was I was completely burnt out. So I finished residency. I was in practice for about 7 years, and I had gone through this health crisis that I'd come out the other end of, and I was doing much better. But I was also just completely burned out. It was right after COVID. I had been, working ungodly hours for, it had been at that point 14 years, of just never being home, working too much, and I was just straight up burnt out. And I told my wife, listen, our kids, we have 4 kids. They're all fairly young now. This is the only time we're going to be able to do this. I'm half Indian, so it's my cultural heritage. I said, let's sell everything we own. Let's sell our house, all our stuff. Let's take our 4 kids and our dog and go move to India for a year. And my wife said yes. So we did it. Yeah, I know. She's pretty good with that. But she says yes to a lot of wacky things that I suggest. But we we took our 4 kids and our border collie to India. We enrolled the kids in school in India. I still worked as a neurosurgeon there. I got a temporary license in India, and I did work essentially in mission hospitals where people, who didn't have access to resources could come to me, and I would operate on them. It was usually in very severe situations, like they had fallen down a cliff or been in a horrible car accident and
And you got to love working with Zoom, folks, because we just had a little bit of a pause, but we're back. We're good. I got the doctor back here. Doc, you were just talking about being in missions and helping folks who maybe fell off a cliff was kind of a severe situation. So if you want to pick up there, I think we're back now.
Yeah, so thanks, Rory. Yeah, I was, working and for that year that we were in India, I was working in mission hospitals, providing care for people who had great need and bad times for them, honestly, if they'd been in a car accident or fallen off a cliff. And that was actually really neat, because you're working for free, you're providing care to those who are in maybe the lowest point in their life, and you're making a great impact on them. And it was awesome, and it was a great year for me to go and use my skill to give, without asking for anything back. And it was also a year for me. I got my mojo back. I decompressed. I got reconnected with my cultural heritage. My children and my wife all got to spend a year in India, which is seriously like a different planet. It's so different than the United States. And it was a very good year. And we came back and I came back with renewed vigor. And we settled in North Carolina, and I, took a job with University of North Carolina, and now I'm in neurosurgical practice again. But also when we came back, that's when I started the Dr. Kumar Discovery, where I'm like, hey, there's a lot more to know out there about everything. So let's figure it out. Let me share it with the world. And that's what I'm doing.
Nice, nice. There's a lot of folks who are talking about, holistic medicine and, alternative therapies and all these other types of things. That's been a very popular, growing topic and subject line, especially ever since COVID.
Yeah.
Everybody's been, looking at all these different things, and sort of raging against the drug companies, and stuff like that, of course. You are a neurosurgeon who's having this conversation. So, I mean, immediately when, you and I were talking about you coming on the show, that was one of the first things that caught my eye because you're in the thick of it. You're not just somebody who's sitting off to the side observing, you're in it. So, anything that you have to say just kind of carries an awful lot of credibility to it. I mean, you're there. Um, you have made a lot of different, statements and talked about a lot of different things. What are some of the things, just right off the bat, that people don't know that maybe we should know?
Yeah. Well, I started off my my podcast series with talking about cardiovascular disease.
Hmm.
And that's something that, is very complex, first off. And it is something that touches almost everybody. And the reason I started off with it is because it does touch everybody, and also because there's just so much misinformation in the field of cardiovascular health. And because the field is so complex and understanding of it is so complex, people can make conclusions, companies, doctors, research scientists, they can make conclusions and hold their own with their own selected portion of the literature. And so I'm not a cardiologist, but I am, a human being who's got a cholesterol transport system like everybody else, and a heart, And so I wanted to know, hey, what is the real answer here to what we should be? Where should our cholesterol levels be? Should we be taking statins? How should we be eating? What should our activity levels be like? And that was something I did a 5-part series on that. And that for me was eye opening because I discovered so much that I never learned in medical school. And, um, and so, we can kind of touch on some of the stuff, but, um, there's a lot of information there, and people, if they're interested in that, they should listen to the whole series. But I would say, one, not everyone needs to take a statin, despite what, a a majority of people hear from their doctors.
Yeah.
Uh, LDL, the cholesterol that circulates through your blood, delivers cholesterol from your liver to the rest of your body, is essential to health. And the fact that it's somehow we evolved this, the thought that, or the perspective that we evolved this molecule that was meant to be our demise is just, I mean, honestly, it doesn't make any sense. I mean, we don't, the body doesn't do things to hurt itself. We hurt ourselves with lifestyle and things like that, but the body didn't evolve to create deleterious systems. And so let's just say, let me say this. Cholesterol, without cholesterol, you can't survive. It is essential to the function of every cell in your body. It allows your cell membranes, which are the little capsules around your cells, to be fluid. Okay. And anytime you have any damage in your body, whether it's a cut on your skin or maybe a little nick on your endothelium of your arteries of high blood pressure or smoking, cholesterol is sent there through in a packaged in a molecule called LDL. And it's sent there to repair the damage, not to cause arterial disease or heart attacks. And so we've kind of like basically created a villain out of LDL when the problem is something completely different. It's metabolic health. It's um, uh, oxidative damage from things like smoking. We kind of miss the ball of what's really causing the problem and label it and give essentially a label of bad guy to something that's essential to our biology, which is LDL cholesterol. And so I laid that whole scenario out, explained, how we should think about it, how we should evaluate our risk, because there cardiovascular disease is a big killer of people, I mean, across the world, not just in the United States. And so we do have to think about it like prudently and honestly, and decide what the best course forward is. And I did that for myself. I did that for anyone who listens to it. And I think it's a real honest and unbiased perspective on how to think about cardiovascular disease.
Wow. Okay. And it was how many parts? How many part series?
Five-part series. Yeah.
5 part series.
Yeah.
Okay. So you're doing research on things that even you don't know in
Oh
order
yeah.
to come up with these things. So,
I
okay,
mean,
this is
I mean, Rory, after all the education I got, I still barely know anything, honestly. And I'm not any different than most doctors. You have to go the literature, the compendium of scientific literature on medicine, the compendium of knowledge from ancestral traditions, the whole like community of people putting ideas out there. It is massive. And to go and like and to think that, yeah, I went to medical school so I know where everything is ridiculous, because you don't. And even after like you putting hours of research into these things, I've still only scratched the surface. But what I say is, listen, let's look at the most probabilistic truth for this stuff. What does the literature say? When you strip away bias, because there's a lot of bias and incentives driving conclusions in science. But when you strip away the incentives, you strip away the bias, what does the data really say? What do we see from ancestral traditions, which I think is very important because they're like real world experiments that have been going on for millennia. What makes people healthy? The people who are the healthy in this world, what are they doing? What are they eating? How are they living? And then when we use also the third thing, which I think is very important, is common sense, that we kind of like forget about in medicine. We look strictly at the data and we stop using common sense, not all the time, but a lot of the times. But when we use those three things, put those three things together, we can come to probabilistic conclusions. And that's my goal with, doing these deep dive research episodes, is to try to put together what is the most likely, the most probable truth here, and
nice.
how should we act on it?
Nice. Okay. Um, wow. I mean, you unpacked so much right there. Let me get caught up a little. It's funny because there is an assumption among folks who are not medical professionals that if you're a medical professional, then you know everything. Like, you know all the medical stuff, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, people, my sister-in-law is a nurse And we're always asking her stuff. Hey, you know anything about this? And she's like, I'm a nurse. I don't know everything. So, but she knows a lot. And so you just kind of there's that assumption. And you hear a neurosurgeon and you're like, oh, well, he must really know everything because he's working on the brain, right? But just that layman's, idea. But I understand what you're saying. It's like there's so many specialties and there's so much to actually know that even a neurosurgeon is sitting here doing all this research and coming up with these things. I think that's fascinating all by itself. Um, as you're doing the podcast, and this is a little bit out of order for how I normally would ask questions about this sort of thing, but it's just sort of gnawing at me. Who are you doing the podcast for?
Yeah. Well, I'm doing it for two people, myself, because I am actually learning this stuff and using it to actionably improve my health. I have been doing it for many years now.
Hmm?
But the second group is everyone else. I mean, because the way I look at it is that knowledge out there, actually, like unbiased, honest, clearly clearly presented knowledge is rare out there. I mean, to find it and for it to be freely available and usable is just you don't find it. And so I put this out there so that can exist free for everyone to use, and I'm not giving medical advice in these things or anything. I'm giving actionable tips and ways for people to think about the information I present so that they can use it in their lives. But this is information to help people think more clearly about complex topics that they feel often just is strange to them or is unknowable, and they just have to put all their trust in doctors because they'll never be able to understand this stuff. Well, that's not true. That information is understandable and it's out there. It just needs to be organized and presented clearly, and that's what I'm trying to do for everybody. So myself and everybody, that's who I'm doing this podcast for.
Okay, it's a great answer. Hmm. You've mentioned a couple of times biased or unbiased, and how you want to make sure that you're putting out unbiased information, how the bias is strong. It sounds like that is a bit of an issue for you. And what's the bias? Where's the bias coming from? If you can,
Yeah.
reveal that and say that,
Yeah.
you do always have the option to say, I'll pass on that question, just so you know. I don't want to
No,
put
I
you in a
mean,
bad spot at all.
this is actually a really good question
Okay.
because it's important, right? I mean, it's important not just for talking about health, but in everything in life. We got to kind of see where's the bias
Yeah.
that supports this information, because if we do look at that, we can make better decisions about how to use that information. So one thing I should say about bias is there is no human being on earth who does not have bias. I have
Okay.
bias, you have bias, and every researcher who's put any bit of information out into the world has been biased. It's part of being part of being human. So that's something that if we just know about it, we can go in it saying there is bias here because we know humans are biased. So in the medical literature, one of the biggest biases, and the one that's like just, I mean, it's printed in the article. They'll have conflicts of interest sections at the bottom of every research article where you can see the researcher's biases. And the biggest one is incentive bias because of monetary gain. Okay. Now you're going to ask me, well, so are you saying that people are paid to say certain things in peer-reviewed literature? And I I mean, essentially, yes. It's not direct. It's never direct. It's not like, here, I'll give you, $1,000 if you say that this drug works. It's nothing like that. It's usually consulting fees, research grants, uh, appointments to committees, um, uh, accolades in academics. I mean, these are all incentives that people have to present certain information. So let me give you and then there's just straight up massive amounts of money that can be made by having positive results for a drug. I mean, and we know that because we see these medical based stock companies just boom as soon as they get a clinical trial that works, right?
Right.
So let me give you an example. So statins are the most ubiquitous drug used for treating cholesterol, right? I'm not anti-statin. I'm not. For a certain group of people, they are effective, and their effect is very modest, very modest. Okay, so, but if you look at the main trial, or the main paper that kind of guides a lot of our belief that statins are essential for cardiovascular health, it's called the Cholesterol Treatment Trialist Meta-Analysis. And these group of doctors took all the clinical trials out there on statins, compared them all, and then made conclusions, right? And when we look at that, they include 17 clinical trials. Guess how many of them were industry funded or industry was involved in out of the 17?
I would
Meaning
guess all
those,
of them. Yeah.
all of them. Yes, all of them. I mean, so, and these companies had money to make out of a positive result. So if the result was negative, they'd be crushed. You know,
Yeah.
their stock price would drop. Their their billions that they invested, or hundreds of millions that they invested in drug development would be lost. The company would become illiquid. I mean, there's massive consequences for investing in a drug that doesn't work. Okay, so you could imagine the incentive there to make sure that you have a positive trial.
Yeah.
And what do? Well, you put the scientists on your board, and the scientists get advisory shares. Okay, you see the
Wow. Yeah.
connection here. And so you can, I mean, this is dangerous, Rory, right? I mean, you've got massive amounts of money. You've got people who are have incentive, even if it's not direct incentive, it's an indirect, or it's down the line, to see a drug work. Okay, and oftentimes these drugs do work a little bit, or they work in a different way than anticipated. But through statistical analysis and data massaging, you can paint a picture of what you want to see. And I'll tell you this, Rory, it's not always like a evil plot. Oftentimes it's a subconscious effort. They know that their career is going to be better if they have a positive result for this statin. So the data maybe doesn't look great, but they write it in a way because they believe so much that this is a great drug or this is a great treatment, that they write the paper. They massage the data so that it basically reflects their bias, their subconscious, their conscious biases. And that, so I never go and say, hey, there's a bunch of bad people doing outside. I never say that, right? Because I'm a human being. I have bias. They have bias. It's just something that we have to be aware of, and we have to cast a critical eye on. Because if we do that, we can hopefully see, what the real answer is. A lot of these trials publish their data, and you can look at the raw data, and that's what I've done in a lot of these podcasts that I've done.
Wow. I mean, none of that surprises me because I've kind of heard it all before. I've never heard it from a neurosurgeon.
Okay.
So, it's one of those things where I think as a society, especially in our country, we've already gotten over the fact that the news is no longer news. It's all
Yeah.
biased. But the one thing that I think we all, sort of hoped we could count on was that, medicine was either it either worked or it didn't. And if it didn't, then you don't take it. It's just one of
Yeah.
those things. And so whenever I hear these things, it gets glossed over a little bit. People will shake their heads and go, man, greedy this, or, these people over here are bad. And, but then they blow it off. And I'm like, okay, this is really serious because
Yeah.
the pill you just got prescribed may not actually do what everybody is saying it
Mhm.
does. And how do you know that until you take it and you get damaged?
Yeah.
When you can't trust that the medical profession because of that, because of
Yeah.
the drugs, where does it leave you?
Yeah. And and the last thing I want to do is sow distrust in the medical
Of
profession, but
course, yeah,
you have to stay critical. And oftentimes, so like, say you're gonna, you're asymptomatic, but you're 45 years old and your cholesterol's a little high, and you go into your doctor, they say, well, you should take this statin. Why is the doctors telling you that? Well, because a drug rep came in and gave them a glossy pamphlet that said a 45% reduction in cardiovascular disease if you take the statin. So the doctor's seeing a clinical trial, a glossy pamphlet that says this. They think they're doing the right thing. I mean, that's just what they think, and like the American Heart Association and all these large organizations support this premise. So they're operating within their standards of care. At least they think they are. But little did they know that there's deception behind that. One, a 45% reduction in cardiovascular disease, when that's going from 0.2% to 0.1% reduction in people, who have who can only in people who can tolerate the drug. All of a sudden, you realize the absolute reduction is what it's 0.05%. Rather than they'll say a 45. What they'll say is it's a 45% reduction in cardiovascular disease if you take the statin. That's a relative reduction because the risk is going from 0.2% to 0.1%. So the absolute reduction is 0.1%. But the risk of taking that statin is that you got about a 10% risk of myopathy. You've got risk of dementia. You've got risk of cardiomyopathy. You've got risk of diabetes. You've got a risk of feeling generally horrible. I mean, I've tried statins twice when I was both one when I was in medical school and one when I was early in my residency. And I'll tell you, both times my doctor's like, yeah, your cholesterol's high. You got to go on this. I mean, I'm a young guy, but with high cholesterol, never had any history of cardiovascular disease in my family. I'm generally healthy. And both times I took it, it literally dropped me to the floor. I was so wrecked until I went off those drugs. And I told the doctors,
Wow.
I was like, I can't take this. And they're like, okay, try this different one. I can't take this one either. They're like, well, I guess you're just the unfortunate one. That was their perspective on it. A few people can't tolerate it, and you're one of it. So you're unfortunate because, Rory, when I was in medical school, one of the cardiologists who came and gave us a clinical lecture told us as medical students that statins should be put in the water supply. Yeah, I mean, that's how convinced. He's not lying. He's not making stuff up. He really literally feels that statins are so important to human health that they needed to be basically given to people without informed consent in the water supply. That
Wow.
wasn't just like some conspiracy. I mean, that's something we do. We put fluoride in the water. I'm not opposed to fluoride in the water, but that is a medical treatment without informed consent that we do on a large scale.
Yeah.
So that stuff does happen.
I gotta ask. You seem like a very nice guy. And you're accomplished. You've got a wife. You got kids. Um, you're putting out a podcast that's very informative. But as someone who has experienced a lot of hate online, I'm already worried for you. So I don't mind saying this during the interview because I want to get it. I want to make sure it's public. I mean, I have other podcasts that I've done that have been around a lot longer than this one. And, all I did was talk about fatherhood and masculinity and stuff back in, 5 years ago. And I had 3 death threats over that topic.
Oh my
You're
God.
talking about drug companies. You're talking about medicine. I mean, and you're a neurosurgeon. Um, do you worry about the blowback when this podcast gets bigger?
Yeah, I mean, I I haven't considered it, Rory, honestly. I mean, I assumed that I knew I was talking about controversial topics.
Uh-huh.
But the thing is that this is the thing. You can label them controversy, and controversial, and I don't know if we should label them controversial, but maybe a lot of people would. But I'm just actually putting data out there and honest interpretations of the data. I'm not going out and making anything up. I'm not spreading conspiracy theories. I mean, you got a lot of that going on online, just misinformation.
For
I'm
sure.
taking actually the real data and giving it to people in a clear and honest way. And if I start getting death threats, I mean, gosh, that means I'm reaching more people. So maybe it's worth it,
Yeah.
because honestly, this is something I would have wanted. before I had the ability to understand and thoroughly research the literature. I would have wanted someone to come to me and say, "Hey, Ravi, here's what the data really says, and here is how you could possibly interpret it, and here is um, some actionable tips to live your best life."
Yeah.
I wouldn't
Nice.
have taken those statins as a young man. you know?
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love where your heart is. I really do, and I love your dedication to getting that information out there in an unbiased way. So let's talk about the podcast. In terms of what you're doing with it and how you're using it. The How many episodes do you have out so far? Because I know it's fairly new.
Yeah. I have 11 episodes out.
Excellent. Okay.
Yeah. I
Are
put out
you
the 12th this Sunday.
good deal? And you're publishing weekly
I'm
right
trying
now?
to. It's,
Okay.
so basically what I've done is I was first publishing weekly because I had kind of I built up a bunch of them, recorded them and built them up, and I was able to publish weekly. But I'm putting in about 40 hours of research per episode. And so I mean, working a full-time job on the side and a
Yeah.
bunch of kids, it's hard, honestly. So what I've done is I've gone to bi-weekly with the deep dives. Those are where I go deep into a topic. I've talked about vitamin D, vitamin K2, omega-3 fatty acids. I mean, I put a lot of stuff out there that it's very valuable, but it takes a lot of research to understand and present. So I think I can do them. So what I've gone on to is I'm doing those bi-weekly, but in the intermediate weeks, I'm doing a new series which lives in the same feed, the Dr. Kumar Discovery feed, but I'm calling this series Tribulations, and it's telling medical stories.
Nice. Nice. So medical stories. What do you mean by that?
Well, it's stories from medicine's past. Stories are fun. First off, they're fun to hear. They're enjoyable to hear, but they also I find, especially in medicine and history, they teach us lessons. And so what I'm trying to do is find stories that we can learn something from. They can inspire us, they can entertain us, and they can teach us something. So the first I did. Yeah, so the last week I put out an episode on Ignaz Semmelweis. He's and it's a really cool story with actually a really tragic story with a pretty nice a good lesson, I think, for us. And it's about a 6-minute episode. It's very enjoyable to listen to. So if you get a chance, you should listen to it. But he was a Hungarian physician in the 1850s, working in Vienna, Austria, and he was basically they were all general practitioners back then, right? They treated all things. And what they noticed in this hospital was that there was 2 maternity wards. One maternity ward was run by doctors and residents, and one maternity ward was run by midwives. And in the doctor's ward, the 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 postpartum death rate, meaning women dying after birth, was 3 times higher than the death rate in the midwives ward.
Oof.
And Dr. Semmelweis is like, why is this? I mean, these are the best trained physicians in all of Europe. Why are these women dying in their ward, but in the midwives ward, they're doing fine? And so he started investigating this, and he realized, and one of his friends actually at the time was doing an autopsy, cut his hand, and then he died of the same disease that these women were dying of in the physician's ward, which at the time they called childbed fever, because the women would get horrible fevers. They become septic and die essentially after birth. And Dr. Semmelweis saw his friend die of this after cutting himself in the autopsy lab. And then he noticed that the residents and the doctors were performing autopsies, no gloves back then, by the way, not washing their hands, and then going up to the maternity ward and delivering
Oh,
babies. so, so he said, "Hey,
oh,
let's do an experiment." So he said, "Let's do an experiment. Let's." He told all the doctors, "I want you to wash your hands with chlorinated lime." It was a what they thought was an antiseptic solution at the time. Mind you, at that time, no one knew about bacteria. Bacteria hadn't been discovered yet. So he had all the doctors wash their hands with chlorinated lime before they went in to do their deliveries. And the death rate went from 18% down to 1%
Wow.
postpartum after birth. And so he had shown with basically overwhelming evidence that not doing autopsies and not washing your hands and delivering babies was causing women to die. Well, every doctor rejected this data. Yeah, they rejected it. They rejected it so hard that they fired him from his post. And he became, Semmelweis was definitely like an outspoken, like, he didn't bend to anything, and he got very angry and he became very outspoken, writing open letters and protests and everything. And the doctors did not like this. So they contacted him and they said, hey, listen, there's a new hospital we want to show you. Maybe you could work there, right? So they took him to this hospital, and he was skeptical, but he said, I'll go along with you guys. So he went to the hospital, and when he arrived there, he realized it was a deception. They had taken him to a psych hospital, an asylum, and he was the patient. So he immediately tried to run away, but the guards there caught him, beat him, put him in a straitjacket, and threw him in a cell. And then they would douse him cold water, force feed him castor oil to purge whatever was going on in his intestines, because that's what they thought was the source of insanity at the time. And when they beat him very severely. He got wounds, one on his hand, but all across his body. They became infected, and he died of sepsis in a cell. Yeah. So here is this guy who had figured out definitively how to save women from infection through sanitary medical practice. He wanted to improve medical practice, improve life. And the idea that could be a thing was so offensive to these physicians that they essentially had him killed. I mean, they probably didn't want him to be killed, but their actions killed him. And that reflexive rejection of new knowledge is something called the Semmelweis reflex. They've named it after that. And it happens all the time. In fact, I'm guilty of it. You probably have too. I mean, it's just a basic human response. When you create this construct of truth in your mind, and then someone tells you something radically different, you're like, no. I don't even want to look at it, because that can't be true.
Right.
And that happened. And I told that story in the last episode. And, after him, James Lister and Pasteur and Nightingale, Florence Nightingale, they all came out within the decade of that, said, you got to wash your hands. You're causing infections. I mean, Pasteur developed the infectious theory of disease and all this stuff. So he was right. Semmelweis is right, but he was basically imprisoned and killed over it. Yeah. So that was a tragic story, but the lesson is good. It's that, listen, when new knowledge is presented to you, allow your mind to be open, allow your mind to change if what you thought was right and turns out to be dead wrong, because it'll bring you closer to the truth. And being close to the truth in life it makes life better, honestly.
Yeah, that I caught part of that episode just as I was going through some of your episodes. I listened to several of the 5-part series. That was really interesting stuff. You're onto something really cool here, because you've got, the story, which is entertaining in one way. You've got the medical facts and the knowledge in another way. And you're doing something pretty neat here, especially since you have the credibility of who you are and what you've accomplished in your life outside the podcast. So congratulations for that, because, I've been doing this a while, and I can usually spot it, and I think you're onto something neat. As you do this podcast, let me ask you a couple of quick, podcaster type questions. It's fairly new, I know, but what are you doing to promote the podcast?
So far, it's been mostly by word of mouth.
Okay.
I've released 11 episodes. I've had about 2,500 downloads. I do have a Facebook channel, a YouTube, Instagram, TikTok. And I do post excerpts of the podcast on there, and post, brief kind of descriptions of things I talk about in there, to try to tell people, hey, this is what I'm doing, and if you're interested in hearing more, come over. I think those have been probably fairly not very successful, but they've raised some awareness.
Sure.
Um, the I I'm not selling anything, so and everything I do is free. So I'm I have done some paid promotion, um, and they've been across the board just failures.
Right.
You're just dumping money and seeing nothing.
100%.
Yeah.
You're
So
right.
it really is. I feel like everyone I talk to. I mean, I get good constructive criticism, but most of the people I talk to are like, "Man, this is valuable, Ravi," and thanks for doing it. So I think that the more people hear it, and the more people who tell their friends and family about it, it'll eventually catch on. I imagine it's one of those things where it's a slow build and then it exponentially grows. I don't know. I've never podcasted before, but I think that's how it's going to go.
Nice. You want to get this information out, and a lot of people would have chosen maybe a book, to get this type of thing out. You chose
Yeah.
a podcast. What was it about the podcast idea and feel and area that appealed to you and said, I want to use a podcast to get my message out?
Yeah. So, I mean, I it for me, it's the most powerful media is spoken and oration. I mean, because if you listen to my podcast, even my deep dive scientific podcast, I'm telling stories in there. I'm
Hmm.
giving historical vignettes and clinical situations and all sorts of stuff. And I just feel like storytelling, oral dictation is so powerful, and I think it's more impactful than books. That's not to say I'm not going to write a book. In fact, I have written a book, it's on my neurosurgical career. It's not so much on the health stuff I'm talking about now, but it, I think that if I were to, the way I like to consume information is by hearing it from a person, you know,
Yeah.
and when there's some connection that's made there that's just not made on paper. So that's why I've started with the podcast.
Nice. Are you doing audio and video on the podcast?
Yeah,
Yeah.
audio and video. Yeah.
Okay, that's what I thought. Excellent. And where are you putting the video out?
So the video's on YouTube.
Okay.
I've downloaded a couple of them or uploaded a couple of them to Spotify
Okay.
because they have a video option now.
Right.
And then there's the shorts on Instagram and TikTok.
Nice.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Honestly, those shorts, I don't know if your audience is doing it, but cutting up the podcast and the shorts and posting those, they have not been super successful for me. I mean, the engagement is not very high. Occasionally I'll get one that pops and gets like 9,000 views or something like that, but that's very rare. And,
Yeah.
I think that the people, and so the video and then YouTube's been okay. I've got maybe a few hundred, subscribers with YouTube videos, but really the audio only podcast has been my most successful
Excellent.
medium. Yeah.
Okay. I mean, that says a lot to who's listening to it,
Yeah.
right there, which is interesting also.
Yeah.
You've got quite the interesting project going on. I'm very intrigued. Yeah, we should talk afterwards for a couple of minutes about some of this stuff. But in
Okay, cool.
terms of the podcast itself, let me just ask you another question or two. Are you using AI in any of your podcast production at this point?
So so the way the research I do on it is like extensive, and so I'll basically use this this AI software called Sci-Hub that basically helps me research the literature. I'll go through Google Scholar and PubMed, and then I'll go through um, this AI software to try to compilate the literature, and then or compile the literature, and then I'll take all that literature and I'll create an outline. Then I'll basically do a rough dictation of what I would say on the podcast. Based on my outline and all the information I've got there. I've got all these papers and I'm just kind of pulling the information. And it takes me maybe about 3 hours to do that dictation.
Nice.
And it's really rambling. It would never
That's
be, you could never publish that, you know? Yeah. And so then what I'll do is I'll take that and I will parse it into sections, each sections, and I'll plug that into ChatGPT and I'll say, help me smooth the flow and the prose of this section.
nice.
And it'll kind of like take all the repetition and everything, and it'll create a and the, you know, incoherent thoughts and stuff, and it'll put them into a more like essentially something that flows, you know. And then I'll take that section by section until I have a whole script, and then I put that script on a teleprompter and I read it during my podcast.
Okay.
Yeah,
All right. So
yeah.
that you're reading through the podcast.
I'm reading on teleprompter. Yeah.
Well, you do a pretty
I
good job of it. I wasn't
Yeah,
sure.
yeah, thanks. Yeah. I mean, my first thought was like, no, I'll just riff on it, you know, because I'll learn all this stuff and I'll riff on it.
Mhm.
And I was like, gosh, man, I'm not as effective at getting the information out in a meaningful period of time if I'm just riffing, you
Yeah.
know, like we are doing right now, you know?
Right.
And so, and especially these are, you know, these are like super informationally dense.
Right.
And so, you know, my thought was just, I'll just have some notes and, you know, so I can, you know, reference numbers and stuff. But I just didn't think it was as good. So I decided to do it this way.
Excellent.
Yeah.
All right. I appreciate you sharing that with everybody.
Yeah.
That's interesting stuff. Let me hit you with my corny question here, since we're getting close on time. The when you're doing your podcast, what is it about doing the podcast that you love the most, and what is it about doing the podcast that you just really and truly hate the most?
Yeah. Yeah. So the thing I love the most is learning, because I love to learn. You know, I'm very curious, and you know, so I'm uncovering. I mean, at the end of every, so I, you know, 2 weeks is my period for researching and producing a podcast. And at the end of that 2 weeks, you know, Ravi, before the podcast and the research started, and Ravi at the end of that, is a completely more knowledgeable person. And I love it. You know, I love, all of a sudden my world is more clear. The way I think about things is more clear and more informed. And I love that. I love, you know, transforming my mind over a 2 week period. Um, thing I don't like is, you know, I'm doing everything myself. All the
Yeah.
editing, all the producing, all the, you know, posting. And at the same time, I'm trying to run a practice and be a father and all that. So it is too much work, honestly, for long term. For short term, I can do it. You know, once the podcast gains some traction, then I'm sure I'll bring people in and start, you know, kind of outsourcing some of these jobs.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, good answers. Good answers, especially the first one. I appreciate that. All right. Listen, I love it. Before I, kind of wrap up with our last question, why don't you let everybody know how they can reach you, how they can find your podcast, your stuff? Do you have a
Yeah.
website? How do they reach Dr. Kumar?
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm on all the major podcast providers. So just search the Dr. Kumar Discovery and it'll come up. Um, my website is drkumardiscovery.com, and it's with DR. So drkumardiscovery.com. And I'm on all the major social media platforms. So you can just look me up, and I post the most on Facebook. And yeah, I mean, I would love to get feedback from people. You can email me. Is it okay if I provide my email?
Of course. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, it's Dr. Kumar, DRKUMAR, at DRKUMAR discovery.com. So Dr. Kumar at drkumardiscovery.com. Anyone can email me. I mean, you know, I can't give medical advice or anything, but if you got like questions about an episode or suggestions, I love suggestions. I love critique and, you know, ways I can improve. So also, if anyone wants to help me get the word out, I would love, you know, I mean, posting it on their socials or whatever, you know, it's all free information. And the only thing I want is for people to have it, you know?
Yeah. 100%. No, I love it. All right. Our last question here as we kind of wrap things up. You've been doing it a short time, but you have, gotten out these episodes, and I'm sure there's a few things you've encountered. So, what's your best piece of advice for somebody who's either, brand new like you are or hasn't even started yet? What's the best piece of advice you can give to those folks?
Yeah, I mean, when I was thinking about doing a podcast, the standard is doing what we're doing, just interviewing someone, bringing people with knowledge, sharing and helping them share the world with the world, and that's great. But you need to find a niche. You got to have something that other people aren't doing. Because if this is my impression, and I'm not an expert podcaster, right? So you or you might be able to give this advice way better, actually. So, but honestly, being another fish in the ocean of fish doing the same thing is going to be probably difficult. I would say find your niche, and that and if it's valuable, it'll catch on. I mean, because I'm always looking for value. I love podcasts. I love listening to podcasts. And anytime I hear a one that like really is like unique or different, I'm immediately a fan. And so yeah, if you're going to start a podcast, do it. Do it like that. Find out what you're passionate about and how you can set it apart from everyone else who's doing it, you know? And don't expect anything from it. Take it from me. Don't expect anything from it except work. If you like the work, though, it won't be a problem.
Nice.
The other one is I use Riverside FM for editing, and it makes it so much easier. There are there are some complaints about Riverside FM, so you could try. There are some other ones that are do similar, but it's text editing. You basically are cutting and pasting or whatever on the text instead of the waveform, and it correlates with the audio feed, or sorry, the video feed. And so it makes even though I spent a lot of time producing and editing my podcast, without that I would be spending three times the amount of time, I'm sure. So it's been
Right.
really helpful for me.
Very cool. Very cool. I appreciate the advice.
Yeah,
Hey, I mean, you've been through a few things you've started. There are a lot of people who listen to this who haven't started yet. So
yeah, yeah,
it's
cool.
it's awesome. Dr. Kumar, I appreciate everything. I really do. All the honesty and behind the scenes look at what you're doing. And I wish you nothing but the best as you grow this podcast. I think you're onto something really big here, brother. So I think it's gonna go well for you. Thank you for coming on the show today.
Yeah, thank you, Rory. It's been awesome.
Thank you. Folks, this is another absolutely fantastic episode of the Podcaster Nation. The reason we get these powerful folks on here with these awesome messages is because this is the podcast. It's about podcasters, it's for podcasters, and it's done by podcasters. Folks, we showed again today, I'm sure, that this is the place where the rising tide raises all ships. So keep sailing.